Okay, so this is an AVO MkII, and I have a manual that I purchased with it. Now this is the first edition, 1950, so this Mark II must predate that. It must be late 1940s, so it's quite a relic of the, the valve era. So what I got with it was this AVO valve testing manual, first edition, 1950, and also a data book, the AVO valve data manual. So this book contains all of the settings for the AVO to set it up. For example, I'm going to be testing some ECC81s and a few ECC83s. So I'm going to have a look at, now you're not going to be able to see this, but it's got all the valve designations down the, I'll bring it in close and see if this camera will focus. So ECC81 is 1, 2, 3, 4 from the top. 741226, 413 with the heater voltage, negative grid volts, anode volts, and then some expectations of anode current and milliamps per volt. That's the transconductance or the gain, I would imagine. So this is the book that you use to set the thing up. Now, I've set up the code that was stated in the book on this top part here. So, and a series of thumb wheels. So you're just going to like move it from position to position until you get the right one. So it's 741226413, and that's for an ECC81. Now, it took me a wee while to work this thing out, right? Because it's quite a complicated beast. I purchased this off eBay. I can't remember the seller, but I remember that he said that he'd made a small addition to it. So this is the backing off control that allows you to null the native idle current draw through the valve to 0, and then measure the extra current as a result of a grid being applied. So that's the actual kind of gain. So really, you're not interested in the idle current, you're interested in the extra current that you get for any given input at the grid. Now, understanding how valves work and even sort of FETs for that matter is something that didn't come to me very easily, but I sort of work in a related industry, so it's a bit easier for me to understand it, and I still don't really fully understand it, to be honest, because it's quite technical. But this meter can not only test for grossly faulty valves with short circuits and so forth, it can give you a rough indication of health like an emissions meter, but it also can actually measure transconductance correctly. You could even do curves, transconductance curves and so forth, just see like you see in the data books. I'm not going to do that. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice, the meter right in the middle is lit up. So it's a Mark II. Apparently the Mark III doesn't have the lit up meter. I think it looks quite cool. But you can see that I'll try and zoom in here in the camera. You can see that the needle is not quite at the red mark. That's the red mark just here. That means that the wall voltage isn't quite spot on. So the way to set this thing up initially is to have the meter selector, this one here, at the most gross scale, which is the scale of the meter when you're doing a test. The electrode leakage at the wee wiggly mark, I'll zoom back out again to get a bit of light in this. And then setting the voltage at the mains, you should try and click it into a position where it's more on the red mark. So I'm just clicking from position to position. It's nearly there. One more. That's slightly over, and that's slightly under. So that's good. So now I've calibrated the meter for the mains voltage. It means that all your subsequent measurements are at least made at the same voltage. It's really like a voltage divider adjuster there, probably clicking in some shunt resistors. So now I've got that, and I've got the electrode leakage tester, which tests all the different elements of the valve, set its default position, and I'm on check cold. So now I'm going to get a valve and pop it in, but firstly I'm going to make sure, according to this valve data manual, that all the settings are correct for the valve I'm going to be testing. So now of course I've lost my place. There we go, got it. Right. So according to the book, it should be 741, that's up there, 741 226 413, and it is. I've got the filament voltage, the heater voltage at 6 volts. This is additive, so if I were to switch on to 10 there, with the next click, that would be 10 plus 6, that's 16 volts. But these triodes work at 6 volts. There's not a 6.3, so you can't get 6.3, but the book says 6 volts. Some of them say 6.3, but I don't know how you get it, because you can only add, and there isn't a 6.3 setting, so 6 volts it is. The next thing is making sure that the negative grid voltage, that's the bias, is set at -2. So set that to -2. And the anode, the plate voltage, at 250. That's that one there, 250. Screen volts is irrelevant. Set to 250, just in case I'm going to do a pentode. But triodes don't have screens. So this one here is the double triode, the A1, A2, which is each half of the valve. The meter selector does the scale on the meter, and can also do kind of almost emissions style comparative results when you set it to milliamp per volt, and then use this set to its recommended book value, just to give you an indication in the red or the green. But if you want the real value of transconductance, then you set it to the appropriate scale here, and then press the milliamp per volt button after you've backed it off to get rid of the quiescent current in the valve. So the first thing to do in all of these cases is just to make sure you've got the filament voltage set correctly, and having a look at this book, set the negative grid voltage to its recommended -2, the anode voltage to its recommended 250, and all the rest of the values are expectations for a perfect valve according to the Mullard spec. So I've set everything correctly, and now I'm going to do the electrode tests, short circuits and so forth. So I'm on check cold, so the filament is not on, the valve won't be on, and I'll pop a valve in. So just get an ECC81. Now for you Yanks out there, it's a 1287, man. Sorry for that terrible American accent. Tubes, I should call them tubes as well. But being British, they're valves, and this is an ECC81. I'll pop it in. Okay, nice and secure. See that? These are ones I bought from Langrex. Okay, so I'll do the short circuit testing. So this is cold, and the heater should show a short because you can only draw current through a short circuit. So that's showing that the heater is intact and will draw current, which is good because otherwise it wouldn't work at all. And then just go through all the different elements of the valve. Cathode, no short, no short, no short, no short, no short, which is good. And then do second half. Heater is intact, no short, no short, no short. That's no short down there. That's low. That's high megohms. No short, no short. Okay, that's good. Now I'm going to switch the valve on to heat, and you should see the valve lighting up. I'm not sure you'll be able to see it, but I'll see if I can angle this camera to let you see that. I've got a tripod here and I'm trying to angle it up to the valve. Yeah, you can see it, look. It's getting hot. Okay. So now, apparently you don't need to do anything. Now I've seen some instructions on the internet that you need to go through all these electrode checks again. But the actual valve testing manual says that it's done automatically. I mean, for example, if I go to heater, nothing happens. Nothing happens. I don't think you need to actually go through this selector again to check for short circuits on this heater. It says in the AVO valve testing manual, this thing here, and I'll quote from it. It's a bit confusing to read it, but at the check H position of the switch, the valve is automatically tested for electrode leakage with the heater hot between the cathode and heater strapped and all other electrodes. It's only the check C, this one, the cold, where you have to go through this electrode leakage selection. Okay, so this next one is the insulation check, which it's automatically tested for cathode to heater insulation with the valve hot. Okay, so both of those are fine. So now I'm going to go on to the test side of things. Right, and one of the things I found that was essential for this thing is you need to make sure that the backing off, this set 0, and this little additional thing that the seller who sold me this thing had added in just for extra sensitivity, are all the way clockwise. Okay, if you don't do that, and I was confused because it was reading less than 0, and I was going, oh, this, you know, this thing isn't working properly. But just make sure that all of these are to the far right. Don't let Keir Starmer hear me say that, by the way. So you can see that it's reading on I think the meter selection, yes. So the meter selection is quite important because this covers the sensitivity of the meter. So you can see that there's two scales, 100 and 25 full deflection. So they are for both straight milliamps, which is the idle current draw of the valve, and also milliamp per volt, which is the additional current for any given voltage applied above that, which is basically the transconductance, or how much extra signal the thing will give you for any additional voltage at the grid. So the meter selection is at 100. So that's the top scale there, and I'm reading 10 milliamps. Now, if you look at the actual spec for the thing in the book, this is the valve data book. The spec for an ECC81 is 10 milliamps, right? Which is good. 10 milliamps. Now let's check the second one, second half of this dual triode. Again, about 10. So I'm going to use the different scale now. So I'll go into 25, right? And there's a bit more sensitivity there. I don't really want to go on to the next one, which is 10 milliamps for full deflection, because that'll take me beyond the meter's range. So that's as sensitive as I can get. So you can see there that I'm reading on the 25 milliamp scale about 10.5 on triode 1 and about 9 on triode 2. Okay, so it's drawing, in terms of its quiescent current, about the right amount. Now we need to test its ability to amplify. So that was purely how much current is being drawn by the valve without any extra voltage being applied at the grid. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to back it off, as they say. I'm going to null this out. I want to go that to go to 0, so that I can then apply small voltages at the grid and see how much extra I'm getting, which is really the amplifying property of the valve. So what I'll do now is I'll back the thing off. So I'm going to take this down to 0. Now this is an extra sensitivity thing, which is quite handy. It was a modification, an addition that the seller added in just to make it easier to use, which is very good. I forget who it was now. Okay, that's almost 0. I'll take it to a finer scale. I'm not sure if I want to go to 2.5. The expectation is, if I go to the, I've closed the book again. Yeah, damn. Okay, this is an ad hoc video here, right? So I find it really difficult to find any information about the Mark II. This is an AVO MkII on the internet. There's plenty of Mark IIIs, but the Mark III is slightly different. Okay, so the expectation would be 5.5 milliamp per volt. So I think 2.5 is a bit much. So that's almost 0. I'll just 0 it a bit more. Okay, now the way to test it is to press milliamp per volt. I'm going to put this book down and make sure I don't close it. There we go. All right, if I press this after I've backed it off, that is now going to give me an accurate measure of milliamps per volt based on a 10 milliamp per volt scale. Okay, so that's the top one, 1 decimal place. So that is 6 milliamp per volt. Spec's 5.5. So that's quite good. That's actually slightly better than spec. And I'll try the second one. Aha, now I need to reverse the backing off just a tad to make that go to 0. Remember, this is additional current based on applying a specific voltage at the grid. So this is on top of the idle. You've taken away the idle, normalized it to 0. So now on this scale here, I'm going to press the milliamp per volt. And this one is doing 5.8. So these would be the readings you would write down for transconductance, 5.8. And back it off again. That's about 5.8 for both, actually. So that's quite a well-matched ECC81 or 1287 and that would be a good valve. So let's try another one. So I'm going to turn this back to insulation check, no shorts, no shorts, and check colds. That's basically switching the heater off, and that should go back to the red mark. It's not quite, so reset the mains voltage. There we go. Mains voltage is always fluctuating. Okay. Oop, that's quite hot. Right, hang on. Get a glove. Yeah, just watch. You don't burn your hand. I've got a special science glove here. Ha ha ha. Science. And just wiggle it out. There we go. Put it in a safe place. Now, I've got one here, 1287. I was going to reject. Back to Langrex. I've already told them about it. So I'm going to test it now and just make sure I'm not talking rubbish. So I'll put this in. There we go. Now, go right before I do anything, go back to 100, the least sensitive scale. It's on check cold. I've not changed anything, so it's still set up for 1287. I'll turn all of these, set the backing off controls off, and ready to go. Now, I didn't mention almost the emission style test, which is clicking onto the milliamps per volt setting and then using this recommendation just to get a general impression of its emissions or its transconductance. It's really basically a go no go test. Somewhere in the middle of that green scale would be good, but I'll try it in this one. Okay, so that's it in, and I'll do a cold check on it. So that's almost mains normalized. The heater should be short circuit, it is. That should be no short, far left, no short, no short, anode 1, 2. That's good. And I think I need to do that onto the second half of the triode and do the same thing again. So the heaters are as short as it should be. That's an open circuit, open circuit, open circuit, open circuit, open circuit. Okay. So go back to anode 1 or triode 1, and I'll turn it on. Okay, so I can see the heater elements coming on, which is good. I've not covered the gas test. The reset's just in case you get a gross short circuit and it protects itself. And that allows you to switch it back on again. It's quite confusing. You've got basically the short circuit testing and gross fault. So this goes through all the different tests. There's a diode and a rectifier setting on the far right. These two settings, you don't need to use them unless you're testing a rectifier. The filament voltage, the bias, anode volts, that's the plate, and the bias, negative grid volts, and screens if you're doing like a pentode or something like that, so a 6L6 or an EL34. And then how you select between different halves of a dual triode, like a 1287 or an ECC83 or something like this. This meter selection does the sensitivity of the meter and which scale you're on. And then that very last setting, milliamp per volt, given this is set to 5.5 as per the data book, if you then set it to that and press the milliamp per volt setting, you just get an indicator. I'll take my glove off. You get an indication of health, not an exact value of transconductance as you do in the any of the settings on the scale here. So that's the basic functions of the thing. I'll go into the insulation check. Okay. Well, that's showing some resistance between the cathode and the heater, which is not ideal, really. I'll give it a wee tap with something. Oh, about a wee my vape. Well, it's not as good as the other one. Something to take a note of, I suppose. Okay, so I'll go into test now. So just make sure that's all to the right. It's on the 100 millivolt per division scale. I've set all the anode grid. Okay, so I'll go into test. And that is reading 10. Oh, 9. So let's go into the 25 scale. Okay, so I'm now reading on the 25 milliamp per volt scale, and it's reading 5, 6, 7, about 8 actually. 8 out of 10 on A1. Yeah, that's not very good, is it? So that's only 6. So it really should measure 10. That's what the book value of the 1287 says. So already, this is sort of confirming what I found in my simple night tube tester emissions device. So the thing was reading very low emissions. Okay, so the idle current is a wee bit low on both halves of it. No matter, I'll back it off. Now I'll use the fine adjustment to back it off down to 0. Okay, I'll change the scale. And press the milliamp per volt. Okay, so I'm on the 10 scale. So that's reading 3.8 or 3.85-ish. Not 5.5, it should read 5.5. So this is actually agreeing with my night tube tester, my simple emissions tester. I also got that off eBay, and it's a bit more crude. It doesn't give you exact transconductance values as this does. This is an accurate measure of the extra current in milliamps for any given additional voltage on the grid. But you can see there, that would be poor, because it should be 5.5. And in fact, the other valve was above was about 5.86. Okay, well, let's try the other half of it. Okay, so I need to recenter the 0. There we go, and put it back to 0 again. Ready to test this half. 3.2. So I'm on the 10 milliamp per volt scale, and I'm looking at the top here, which is marked 100 for full scale deflection. So each one is moved back 1 decimal point, and that would be 3.2. And it should be 5.5. So I think that confirms the impression that the emissions gave. But however, I'll go on to this milliamp per volt setting and set a nominal 5.5 and press the milliamp per volt measure again. And that should deflect to middle of the green if it were a good valve, and it doesn't. That's exactly the same result as my emissions tester. It went into the red, replace. So it should go up to the middle of that green scale with this set in 5.5, which is the ideal value in the in the book, which is this book here, the Valve Data Manual. And looking at it, for an ECC81, it should be 5.5 milliamp per volt. I've got that set to 5.5 here. And then to test, in a similar way to the emissions tester, I've set this to milliamp per volt and press the button, and it should deflect in the middle of the green, and it doesn't. So let's try the first half. So I need to back that off to 0. There we go. And press it again. Yes. That's not a good valve, and that's the exact result I got from my emissions tester. That confirms it. So I hope this is useful, because I never found anything about the Mark II specifically. And I know it's a niche interest, but it's quite an interesting thing to pick up one of these if you're interested in scientific instruments or valves generally. You could actually, if you were so inclined, plot all sorts of relationships between the bias and all the transfer curves of the device. And that's what people used to do when they were designing circuits in the past. This is from the late 1940s. It's a fantastic instrument. It's got all of the... I'll take the camera off the tripod here. So excuse all... Yeah, sorry about that. I pressed the wrong button on the phone. So there's the top of it, which has got lots and lots of different valve types that you can test, including some weird ones with kind of like connections on the top. That looks a bit evil. I don't know what it is. But there's the little thing to set specific test codes for each type of valve. There's the valve under test, which failed. There's the meter. And a great thing. So hope that was of any use. And I'll be back with a more guitar related video soon. Bye bye for now.